Well, let me wire up my source here. So I'm going to use SQL Server, and I've got some old ones from a previous video there. So I use my native client, learnitfirst.com is the database, and our source is the suppliers table. And you can see the source columns are the supplier ID and the supplier name. Okay, nice, very cool. And ultimately our destination is a SQL Server table. I can't remember the name of it. Product supplier history. So that's our ultimate destination. So I now need to find a way to bring Access's column into the table. What we need, or into my data flow, we need the product ID, the value of the product ID for the given supplier. Okay, so I'm going to bring that in using Microsoft Access and using a lookup transform. So here it is. It's under the transformations. So I go from the source to the lookup, and I choose my caching mode. Now, let's talk about caching. Microsoft has built great caching into SSIS 2008. If you're going to be dealing with large numbers of rows, or you're going to be dealing with repeated access, you need to deal with a cache connection manager. Okay, so if you plan on accessing this cache lookup multiple times, or if the cache lookup has lots of the same rows, so lots of indistinct values, then you're going to get better performance using a cache connection manager. Right now we're dealing with 3 and 5 row tables, I think. So we don't have to use the actual cache. A couple of videos from now I'm going to talk a little bit more about cache and how to use the cache connection manager. So I'm going to hold off for that for now. Okay. Now down at the bottom, this is an incredibly important little section down here. What it says is that when you have a source row that does not have a lookup, that has no matching lookup row, what are you going to do? How do you deal with that? And notice the default is that it fails the whole component. Now you might not want to do that. I'm going to leave this for now so that we can see what happens, but we're going to come back and be playing around with this considerably. So notice that the connection type is OLADB. This is going to limit you somewhat. Okay, you're not going to be able to use, by default, the OLADB connection manager for something like Excel 2007, 2010. You're going to be able to use SQL Server, DB2, Oracle, Microsoft Access, but you can't use Excel. And I'm going to show you how you can work around that a little bit later. So you need to make your connection. Notice it's OLADB. So our connection needs to be the Access database. So I'm going to go come up here, and I need to use the Office 2007 Access Database Engine. Okay, not Jet 04, Jet 40, sorry. That would be for Access 2003 or Access 2000. I need to use 12.0 for 2007. And my file name was, I believe, database1.accdb. Let's see. No, dang. Database1, I thought I said. No. Oh, I named it mistransforms 04. Is that it? Yes. And so when I say OK, it says what table. There is only a single table, and you can preview the values. Okay. Show our columns. Let me show you this. Up at the top, this transform enables simple equijoins between the input and the lookup. Equijoins. You know how, that's such a fancy term. It means equal. So what you are defining, let me pull it back right here, here's the input column. So let me write this out. This input column comes from SQL Server, and this is from Access. Okay. Another way to think about it is that this was our source, and this is the lookup, okay, or the lookup table, if you will. So which columns do I need to choose so that I can do my equijoin? How do I correlate the values in the source to the values in the lookup table? Well, the supplier ID, right? So supplier ID is found in both of those tables, and that is an equijoin. I should have written that like that. I want situations where the supplier ID of 1 in the source equals a supplier ID of 1 in the lookup table, because that shows me products that are supplied by supplier ID 1. So you just drag and drop. Choose this. You can have as many columns as you need over here. Now, I don't need to check the box over here, because what checking the box does is it adds a new output column to the data flow. I don't want to add the supplier ID. That's already provided by the source. I want to be able to view the product name and the product ID from Access in the data flow. Okay, so you can see it's adding a new column. I don't want to replace an existing one. I want to add a new column to the data flow. Okay. Now, out of my lookup, I say, let's go. Something different, something we haven't covered here. Let's see if I can get this up here. Right. Coming out of here, the destination input, okay, what is it that you want to bring out of this? Notice, sorry, I meant to zoom in, I apologize. Notice that there are two outputs coming from the lookup, the match and the no match. Okay? So this basically allows you to say, I want all of the matches to go into my destination, but the rows that were in the source, let's just define what no match means in this particular situation, sorry. I need to change that to blue because it's just hard to see. No match are rows in the source with no match in, the lookup. Sorry about that. I didn't think before I did that. Okay. And this is why I spent so much time in the last video talking about which one should be your source and which one should be your lookup. Because any row that's in your source that has no match in the lookup table is going to be in the no match output, or remember when we had this and we got to this and we said what happens right here? Okay, remember we did all of that? We said how to handle rows with no matching entries. What that means is that, how do you deal with rows in the source that have no match in the lookup table? That's what you're specifying. And it says here, if a row comes back, you want to fail this particular transform. That's important. And I'm going to leave it alone. So I want to say that the matches go to the product supplier history. And so now I specify, I go in here and I double click, I choose my connection manager, I tell it I want to load it into this product supplier history, and now notice that in the columns here that both the product ID and product name were added to the data flow as a result of the lookup transformation. And so you can see it automatically chose the right things, and this has got a default, so we're going to ignore it. Okay. So we're ready to go, right? Very simple, not a whole lot to do. Let's hit F5. And we get green. Oh, immediately red. Oh no. Okay, here's what's happened. You have to read through some of these outputs here. So let's kind of zoom up and see what we can do here. Look right there. Let's see a couple of these here. The lookup has cached 4 rows. We told it to do full caching. Okay. So it cached a total of 4 rows. It encountered duplicate reference key values. This error occurs in full cache mode only. Either remove the duplicate key values or change the cache mode to partial or no cache. Okay, the supplier ID was not unique, and so therefore it found duplicate entries. Coming back though, that's over here, that's simply a warning. That's not an error message. However, we finally get the error message right here. Okay? Error. Okay? And you have to zoom over, and I'm just showing you the error here. Sorry. Row yielded no match during lookup. Okay, so you had a source row that had no lookup values. You had a supplier that did not supply any products, because suppliers was your source, products was your lookup. Okay? And that caused an error. And if you read, I'll show you. I'm trying to look. There, right here. The error is fatal and will cause the data flow task to stop running. And it's because of the setting you chose. Okay, you chose, and by the way, we can go look in the supplier product history, product supplier history, and it didn't add any rows. You chose for your lookup, you said that when there are errors with, or when there are sources with no matching entries, fail the component. Now there are other choices up here. If you take a look, we have ignore failure, redirect rows to error output, and redirect rows to no match. So let's talk about what each one of these does, because they can have very significant results, very significant changes to the behavior of your application. Let's do ignore failure first. This says copy source rows. So let's just say copy source rows to output with null for lookup columns. Okay? So in other words, if you have a supplier, because supplier is the source, that has no matching lookup, it has no products that it supplies, then that supplier ID will still be copied to the output, but there will be null for the product ID and product name, because those were the lookup values, and that's showing no matches. In other words, this is very similar to a left outer join in which the left table had no matching rows. That may have just gone right over your head, and that's okay. For somebody that understands that, that will help. Okay? Now, I want to show you that one before I come back and do the redirects. Okay? So let's do the fail component, or let's change from fail component to ignore failure. Let's come over here. We rerun this, and we're going to get a little further this time. We go from green to green. Before we were getting red, and now though we get a red at the product supplier history, and we get a commit failed. And what we see is, if we take a look at the other errors, we see unexpected null value. Okay? And when we scroll over, the destination column product ID is defined as not null. Now, it actually, what's happened, maybe not so clear here, is that it did load the matches successfully. So when we come over here and we take a look at the product supplier history, there are the matching rows. Okay? The non-matches bombed out though. So it got to 4 and 5 and it stopped the processing. It couldn't add those rows, and so that was a failure. It tried to put a null value for product ID in here, and if you remember when we defined the table, we said that product ID was not null, and so it wasn't allowed to do it. Okay? Were we to change the definition of this table to null, then it would have just said 4 null, 5 null. Okay? All right, now let me do this. I have to delete this table, I have to remove the rows from the table so that there are no rows. Now we're back to an empty table here. So come back over here and let's double click again on our lookup transform, and let's now say we want to redirect the rows to the error output. So what this says is, it says, let's zoom in and just write this out. This says any source rows that have no match in the lookup table will be sent to the error handler, okay? Or error output, error handler. Okay? So I'm going to redirect those rows, and it's very common. This is where you would use that little red error here. This is the error here. So now what I would often do in the real world is I would create a new destination for like a flat file, and I would call this the error output, and I would say let's go here. Okay? So redirecting the row when we have no matchup, we want to redirect the row. And let's now come over here and create a flat file destination. It's delimited, error rows, and we'll just call this C error rows.text. Column names in the first row. It auto defines the columns. You can see the column list is from the source. Okay, so these are the source columns. These columns didn't come from the lookup. We say OK. We map successfully, and there we go. Now let's run this, and we'll get green all the way down if I've done everything correctly, and I thankfully got lucky. Sometimes that's how it is with SSIS. You just feel like, yes, I got lucky that time, it worked. And so under the C drive, you see we have the error rows.text, and the error rows that we have are the two suppliers that had supplied us with no products. If we take a look, suppliers 1, 2, and 3 are now in the product supplier history because they have supplied us with products. So that was one technique. Okay, we've looked at 3 techniques for dealing with non-matching rows so far: failing the component, writing to an error file, or ignoring that and replacing the lookup values with null. The final technique, let me delete the rows again, okay, so that this is null, or this is empty. The final one, going back up here to the lookup, is instead of redirecting the rows to the error output, is using the no match output. This is another destination. Let's just do this. That doesn't include error codes. Okay? That's really the only difference between error output and no match output. Let me choose it. Tell you about it here. In the error rows text, notice we had the error codes and error columns. And these, if you looked them up in SSIS, they would say no match, or if you got, or you'd get absolutely nothing here. And let me take the error output out of here. Now I'm going to have a new destination. So here's what I'll do. I'll drag a new SQL Server destination, call it my no match destination, drag on here, and notice this time I grabbed the green arrow, didn't grab the red. You see how it automatically tells it that, hey, this is going to the no match and this goes to the match. And now when I come over here, I can tell SQL Server to auto-generate this. So it calls the table no match, and it makes it a supplier ID and supplier name. Quiz time. Where do those columns come from? They're source columns that didn't have matches, right? But you notice the only difference here is that you don't get the error code and the error output. So that's it. That's all I have to do. I set my mappings up, and that's set up now. And I get hopefully green all the way down again. Sure enough, I do. So 2 rows went to the no match output, and 3 rows went to the match. And we take a look. Sure enough, that came back successfully. But now we have a new table called no match, and it has the 2 suppliers that had no matches at all. Okay? So you have to deal with this. Now let me just back up and say, had I done this like I told you I could have, had I made the products the source and the suppliers the lookup value, every product had a supplier, and I wouldn't have had to deal with no match or error rows at all. It would have just worked by default. But I wanted to show you a more real world scenario, so we had to go the long way and talk about how to deal with non-matching source rows.